Hey everyone, this is Megan Bryanton Jones, owner of Kinetic Advantage Consulting, and what I'm going to do in this voiceover is provide a biomechanical breakdown of Bryce Lewis's squat technique. So in particular, I want to explain why he moves the way he does and why his squat setup allows him to move so much weight. Now, I want to stress that this is an assessment, not a critique. I hate the word critique because it implies that the lifter is doing something wrong and that we are trying to fix them. Instead, the point I want to get across is that how we move is going to boil down to what our bodies need to do in order to achieve the goal of the task, which is moving the bar upwards. Our technique then is a reflection of our body strategy it uses in order to achieve this goal. So I could throw at you a bunch of lifting cues, but when it comes down to a max attempt, your central nervous system is going to take the wheel. This is the underlying principle of compensation, and is also why our squat technique at one barbell load may not look the same at a heavier load. So in this voiceover, we are going to look at how Bryce's movement strategy may or may not change as load is increased as well. Okay, so here is one of Bryce's Instagram videos. Whenever I start an assessment, I initially will look at hip, knee, and bar position. And then secondly, I'll refer to the lifter stance width and bar position. So together, this tracking can tell us how Bryce's positions and his body segments are orientated with respect to the ground and barbell load throughout the entire range of motion. This in turn will influence how hard each muscle group is working. A successful lift is a summative effect of a series of events happening from the bottom of the squat all the way up. We can't just look at one point in time in the lift, because something that the lifter does in the bottom position of the lift may actually impact their performance later on in higher positions. We're then actually going to relate this story that we've unfolded to how we know muscles contribute during various portions of the lift from the current research literature. So lower leg angle and knee travel relative to the toes is the first thing we're going to look at in the chain of events. And that is because in deeper squat positions, the quadriceps for knee extension have to work very hard. So think of muscle contributions during the squat as a sliding scale. From parallel and below, the deeper you get, the knee extensor demands spike up very rapidly. So this is indicated in the dotted line here. And this is a figure taken from one of my research studies that were looking at how muscles contribute, how hard they're working during the range of motion of the squat. So the knee extensors have to work harder and harder the deeper you get in the squat, because you are required to push your knees forwards more. The hip extensors demands actually peak around parallel and then will decrease as you continue to go deeper below parallel. So if we look at this figure from in front of us, we can see that the knee extensor are the primary contributor in deep squat positions, and then the hip extensors are the primary contributor in higher squat positions. The knee extensors then, and this is why I call them the make it or break it muscle group in the deep squat positions. If we have a change in our technique and movement strategy in this part of the range of motion, it's highly likely it's related to knee extensor strength. So this knee position and how it changes during this part of the lift is going to tell us how the knee extensors and the hip extensors are contributing to moving the bar upwards. So you can see in Bryce's squat, he is able to really push his knees forward into a nice deep position. As he comes up out of the hole now, this video is demonstrating to us his lower leg angle relative to the ground, okay? So we can see if the knees are staying forward, if they're coming back very quickly, because remember, the more forward the knees are, the harder the knee extensors have to work. In turn, a more forward knee position will allow for a more upright torso in order to keep the bar center of mass over the middle of the foot where the lifter is most stable. So together, it tells me that Bryce has sufficient quadricep strength to meet the loading demands for knee extension to get into this deep, upright, knees forward position. Now for the ascending phase, if we see a rapid change in body position, such as with a good morning squat, it would tell us that the knee extensors were unable to produce sufficient torques to overcome gravity pulling the bar down, and loading demands would be shifted to another joint. What's interesting though is that once Bryce gets into higher positions, see here, the lower leg extension comes to a little bit of a halt while the hips continue to extend. So remember, this is the zone where now the hip extensors are that make it or break it muscle group. So the fact that Bryce's knees stay forward a little bit longer during the range of motion right here, it tells me that he's allowing his knee extensors to contribute more in the part of the lift. So although we are seeing a nice balance between the knee and the hip out of the hole, in the higher positions, the knee extensors are prolonging their role as a contributor, which tells me they're actually trying to help out the hip extensors. We see that Bryce is able to maintain a nice upright torso position because the knee and the hip are extending simultaneously, as indicated by the knees flowing back slowly out of the hole. Like I said, nice balanced contributions. So his ability to keep his knee forward via his strong knee extensors allows this very up and down bar path. So now let's look at Bryce's 3 squat attempts at the 2018 IPF Worlds. His first attempt at 282.5, we see a very similar movement strategy as we did in the previous video. A nice upright torso, forward knee position in the hole, balance between the knee and hip extension out of the hole, and in the higher positions, we see the knees stay forward a little bit longer to assist the hip extensors. Right there. His second attempt at 300 kilos, we actually start to see slower lower leg extension out of the hole. So his knees are staying forward longer. And this tells us, again, the loading demands for knee extension are staying larger longer. For his final attempt at 312.5, we now start to also see what I call a little bit of a double knee bend. So in the higher positions of the lift, the knees rebend a little bit forward. So he's momentarily increasing the knee extensor demands and transferring loading away from the hip to the knee. So this double knee bend strategy is what gets Bryce through his sticking point. He gets his knee extensors back into the game to assist the hip extensors in the higher portions of the lift. So the story that we're starting to see is that the lifter can either change their body orientation with respect to the ground to use different muscle groups, or that the body will transfer loading between the joints and cause a shift in body segment orientation. I know it's a bit of a chicken or the egg question, but it comes down to if you're consciously or unconsciously changing your movement strategy. So a neat research study that I'd like to refer to is by Yoshioka and colleagues, who simulated how relative strengths between the knee, hip, and ankle can influence sit-to-stand strategy. When they minimize knee extensor contributions and maximize that of the hip, the computer simulator showed increased torso leaning because the lower leg was kept in a more vertical position. In turn, when the hip extensor contributions were minimized and the knee extensors were maximized, the simulated model had a forward knee position and a very upright torso. This is exactly what we are seeing in Bryce's squat technique. Knee extensor contributions are being maximized, and as load is increased, the hip extensors are being minimized more and more. So we can apply this information and now understand that Bryce uses a high bar position because it allows him to take advantage of his relatively stronger knee extensors and reduces loading requirements to the hip extensors. And as a result, we'll see a movement strategy very similar to this. Torso angle remains consistent through the motion, knees stay forward more through the range of motion, and we get a fairly vertical rise at the hip rather than a large amount of posterior hip drift. This next video is a comparison of his 2017 versus 2018 IPF World attempts at 312.5. We see in 2017 a very similar movement strategy, except for that Bryce's sticking point is much longer in 2017. We also see a mild increase in knee valgus in the higher positions of the lift. So the adductor magnus is a highly underestimated hip extensor in deeper hip flexion. So because the knee valgus, though, is occurring in higher positions of the lift, it may be revealing that the adductor is being recruited to assist the glute max in hip extension because maybe the glutes need that extra little bit of help to meet the loading demands. So is this a technique flaw or a fault? Nope. It is just a manifestation of the other actions of the adductor magnus. It is not excessive, so I do not believe that the vertical component of Bryce's leg drive as he pushes down on the ground is being compromised too much. This timeline tells us that in 2017, Bryce's glutes were probably working at a higher percentage of their maximum force generating capabilities versus in 2018. In 2018, we see less synergist recruitment for hip extension, meaning the glutes were able to produce more force. So we've created this big picture together that shows that Bryce's technique has evolved over the years to take advantage of his strengths, and that in between 2017 and 2018, it is very evident that he addressed his weaknesses. And when I say weakness, it is not in a negative way. It is a very rare thing to see complete balance between the knee and hip relative strengths in a lifter. Even the best lifters in the world, their form will change as load gets heavier, and this is a good thing. Why? Because it gives us all the pieces of the puzzle we need in order to determine where a lifter's strengths lie, to determine their optimal technique to move more weight, and gives us direction for how we can develop a training program to bring up their weaknesses. So for Bryce, a high bar position and a moderate stance allows him to get his knees forward, take advantage of his relatively stronger knee extensors. And then accessory movements in turn should be selected to do the opposite in order to provide a mechanical disadvantage for the glutes by preventing forward knee travel. I hope this presentation really got my point across that squat technique selection is not a one style fits all. My training recommendations for all of you is not to strive to squat like Bryce, but instead I hope it encourages you to identify your strengths and play to those strengths when you select a certain squat style. Your main squat training will always reinforce your strengths. So that means your accessory movement should be chosen to address your weaknesses. This is Kinetic Advantage's underlying principles of a movement training optimization for long-term competition success. I hope that everyone listening has learned a lot from this presentation and now think biomechanics is pretty fun. For powerlifting biomechanics content, as well as information of my online lifting technique services, please feel free to contact me or visit kineticadvantage.ca. Thanks everyone. Bye.